you could teach someone this, like you ask them how old they are, they give you an answer. If it's 32, then great, you can go through the process of like getting a license. Um, and so that's the question, is this artificial intelligence? Thoughts? Yeah,
I think it is because it's just simple logic.
I don't think it is because it's just simple logic. I'm going to repeat for the folks on Zoom. Other thoughts? Yeah.
Who made the decision?
Who made the decision?
The decision was
Mhm.
made by some machine or something, and it's artificial. If the definition is a comparison between human and non-human, in other words, are you saying what is non-human is artificial? What is human is reality?
Yeah, so the question or clarification was who is making the decision here? I think it's important to note that the user is not making the decision with this code, right? The user is putting in a number, say 13 or 26 or something, and then the computer is making a code. So it is certainly an artificial decision. The question is, however, is it artificial intelligence? Is there an intelligence behind whether this decision is being made? That's an important clarification, though. I like that. So my personal take, oh, sorry, didn't mean to hit the mic. I forgot I'm wearing a mic. My personal take on this is not artificial intelligence. This is an artificial decision that's being made by a computer, but there's nothing particularly human about this decision. For example, they might say, well, wait a minute, why are you coming to ask me this question when you're 7? Like, right, like clearly the answer is that you aren't old enough to drive, but like there's probably more going on to this story. Why is a 7-year-old in the DMV asking for a license? Right? That's the more human decision to make in this context. So I would say no, this is not artificial intelligence, but that's hopefully a glimpse into what we think about what's different between computer code, which makes decisions all the time, and artificial intelligence, where those decisions just feel much more human. Okay. So here's an example of a whole bunch of artificial intelligences. Um, Someone just there's Face ID in the middle, that funny little smile. Things like routing, things like protein folding, self-driving cars. I was in a Waymo recently. It was super fun. Waymo is the it's like the Uber but with all self-driving cars. It was really really fun. It was out on the West Coast. And it's sort of like a snazzy experience. If you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. Anyways, that's Waymo. Fraud detection, Nest thermostats. On the bottom right, there's a lot of medical data that is being used with artificial intelligence, typically so far alongside doctors, and I personally hope it stays that way. But we'll see what the future holds in terms of medical AI. The medical profession is I think in a lot of ways booming from the advent of AI in really interesting ways, in ways I think are mostly good, although it does ask lots of questions about data and data privacy and protection. So these are all forms of AI, none of which we're going to be primarily talking about tonight. These are all things that are still in development and we're still working on them, but they're not the big, interesting, in vogue idea of AI. When we think of AI in 2025, 2026, 2024, what we're really thinking about is these tools. These are generative AI. So this is artificial intelligence. So it's making decisions that feel like they're human. And it's doing so in a way that generates something. Often we think of these as generating text, and that's the primary vehicle that we're going to be looking at tonight. But there are definitely other ones. Midjourney Stable Diffusion generate images. Sora generates video. And I think that we've heard tale of things like deepfakes showing up. I think it's really fascinating to watch how politics is shifting in the world of AI, especially when it comes to like deepfake videos and things like that. Just I think a couple days ago, Netanyahu was asked to show up on like on live conversation to basically prove that he was alive because of a deepfake video that claimed he was not. So this is showing up. It's present. It's everywhere. So this is generative AI. This is the primary thing we're going to talk about tonight. And we're doing so not because these are unimportant. We're doing so because I think that when you want to join into a conversation on AI, this is the vast majority of the conversations that we're having right now. And also understanding this technology helps you understand the others as well. So this is the primary thing we're going to be talking about. Another reason we're going to be talking about this is because they produce what I would say is writing, although big asterisk on that, which we can talk about. So here's two papers. There's lots and lots of other papers that we could say. There is a deep connection to the formation of narrative, of text, you might say writing, but also speaking, just saying things out loud, which are connected deeply within the synapses of the brain to the idea of thinking more generally. So when we think of writing and the impact that it has on the world, and thinking about writing being potentially replaced by an artificial intelligence, the thing that I spend, again, hit my mic, the thing that I spend most of my time thinking about, possibly worrying about when it comes to AI is that deep connection between writing and thinking. And so I think that that's not just because I'm a teacher, that's definitely an important part to it. But another aspect that I think is just super relevant is that I would argue that one of the most important parts of our humanity is our ability to think. And there's other aspects as well. And if the research holds out, which it certainly seems to, that there is this deep connection within the brain, and I would argue within the soul, between thinking and writing, then something that's coming along to replace writing feels like it's something that we need to know about because it seems like it's asking questions about what it means to be human. I don't think it's replacing humanity in a particular way. And so that's a little bit of the reason why we might do this. One thing you're going to see me do right away is change from the idea of writing to the idea of your voice, what you create, what you produce, what you put into the world. The most important work that you do. If you're Cal Newport, it's your deep work. Like, what is the idea that what is it that you bring to the world? And how can AI support you in doing that instead of replacing you in doing that? That's sort of the primary thing that I want to talk about today. And I don't know what the next slide is, so let's go check it out. I'm going to pause at this point because I've been talking for a while and I want to see if there's any questions.
Yeah, it's really good, but can you speak slower because I'm
I speak slower. I
Okay,
certainly can try to speak slower. I will do my best. Just keep holding up your hand like this. I get really excited when I talk. And if you just keep going like this, I will certainly try to remember to speak slower. Thank you. Okay. So I want to build to what I would describe as the money slide, the real thing I want you to take away from this. And I just mentioned this before, but this is probably the most important idea to me is this idea of AI supporting your voice, or let me get this thing out of the way here. There we go. AI supporting your voice, or AI replacing or supplanting your voice. And again, when I think of your voice, I think of what you are bringing to the world in all different ways. I hope it's not a surprise that I think we ought to find ways to use AI that land us way over here, way on the left. And I think that is really important because I think as someone who's excited about AI, I have a lot of people come up to me and say things like, "Oh, I use AI to write emails for me." And that immediately makes me go, okay. I mean, emails, maybe that's not an important part of your voice. As a teacher, I think it's actually a really important part of my voice. I do a terrifying amount of education through email. But I think that this is an interesting question. Is like in this particular use case of AI, is it worth doing or not? I think this is a really important part of the question that we need to be answering is where is the AI along this spectrum, this use case of AI along this spectrum. Okay, so that's one thing I want us to think about. And then I also want to think about this other axis that I would think about sort of like the future in light of AI. So my future opinion in terms of AI, I would put us, I think there's sort of like two spectra that I see here. There's the evangelists. This is the Ethan Mallocks and the Mark Andersons and the CEOs of Anthropic and OpenAI. And these are all the folks that say, we are dawning into a new era of AI, and it's a golden age of AI because XYZ reason, right? These are the folks that are on that sort of extreme end of the spectrum. On the other end of the extreme end of the spectrum, we have the folks like AI 2027 who have this, you can see the tail end of this graph here, that's basically saying, well, AI is going to learn to write itself. And then after it learns to write itself, it's going to produce superhuman intelligence. And that's going to accelerate and accelerate and accelerate to the point where it wipes out humanity by the end of 2027. Was a claim that was made in, I don't remember when this was published, not too long ago, a few years ago at most. So that's one extreme take. there's another really fascinating extreme take, which is the AI as normal technology fix. And they claim that AI is a total sham, and that it produces absolutely nothing of value. And so we just need to move on with our lives, and there's nothing going on here. There's nothing behind the curtain. So I actually put these two folks together, and then there's a lovely, lovely article that gets them talking to each other that I would highly recommend if you're interested in this extreme end of the spectrum. But these are the folks who say that this is fundamentally changing, probably for the worse. So the AI is normal technology. You might be like, well, they're not saying anything's going bad. They're just saying it's useless. But I think that the other side of their argument is it's also costing all this money and it's also costing all this electricity and yet it's a normal technology is sort of a bit of their thesis. So I would put them on the doom and gloom side as well. So I put myself ever so slightly toward the evangelist side of this, just so you know a bit about where I fall on the spectrum. I call this slow AI, in the sense of like the slow food movement, right? So like you should sit around a table and cook food together. You should still produce amazing voice, whatever that is. You should still use your voice and maybe include some AI potentially in the process. So that's my thesis statement. But let's get into understanding a little bit more about what this generative AI technology is, especially the stuff that's generating text. Although the other tools aren't that dissimilar, there's enough in common with that. Okay, so I think I got another thing here. I'm going to skip that slide. That is a controversial slide. We'll get back to that one at the end. Okay, so the important thing to keep in mind is that inside of generative AI, especially a tool like ChatGPT or Claude or something along those lines, um, there is a tool called a large language model. A large language model. I want you to think of this as being the engine that drives the generative AI. And it's all set up in this particular way. So we have this text at the top that says, forging in its native blank. Okay, forging in its native blank. That is what we would call the context. That's the stuff that we have, the text that we have so far. And what the massive, incredible innovation of the 21st century, I'm accidentally hyping this, what this technology was able to produce is it was able to produce this bit right here, this 22%, 9%, 5%, 4%, 4%. It produced what we would call a statistical distribution, which is the likelihood of what the next word sort of ought to be. Okay, so foraging in its native, it would say, given its massive collection of training data, what's called its training corpus, um, it would say, given what I've seen, land is 22% likely. It's sort of the most likely word, but it's only 22% likely. Okay, forest is the next at 9%, country is the next at 5%, etc. as you go on. So it's producing this statistical distribution. And so you might say, great, let's just take the most likely word. And that's what the early LLMs and the early chatbots did, is they produced this distribution, they took the most likely word, and they said, great, so it's foraging in its native land, and it sort of just like definitively said that that's what it is. But 22%, that's actually not super likely when it's the most likely, but it's not like 97% or something. And so choosing it with this incredibly high level of confidence is actually not what we want to do. We want to take something with a little bit of a dice roll, a little bit of randomness. So here's one take that some researchers say. Researchers say that the general public, the only thing they need to know about AI is that it is a stochastic parrot. A stochastic parrot. What does that mean? Stochastic means randomness is involved, and parrot means it just repeats stuff it's seen before, right? So so like your level one understanding of what an LLM or a chatbot is that it's a stochastic parrot. So that actually has a big impact on how you ought to use it. For example, if you have a particular chat with AI and then you give that text that you had to a friend, they aren't necessarily going to have the same conversation even if they say the same things you said, because of the stochastic nature of it. There's randomness involved. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. And so just to reiterate, I'm getting into teacher mode. I apologize, but I think this is probably the most important part of like knowledge for us to take. We have the idea of the context. This is an important word. You might have heard the term prompt or prompt engineering before. This is all the same kind of idea. The context is the words that lead up to the next word I'm trying to predict. And then we have the distribution, the statistical distribution. This is the percent chance of all the words that are coming next. And then I do what I really like to kind of do some research on and learn about is this idea of sampling. So from given one of those, I pick one again with some randomness. Okay, so that randomness is showing up in the sampling. It uses some really cool, interesting algorithms. I love studying this because this gets us into what is intelligence, anyways. So we can think about how creative writers might use their own sampling algorithm inside their head, and they might pull words from lower down in the list. Whereas someone who's more of a scientific writer might choose words near the top because it's the most likely word, and I'm explaining something really complicated, so I better just choose the most likely stuff so that I can make sense of it. Okay, so I think it's actually really fascinating that these tools give us access back to, they give us language to then go back and think about how humans act. This is a field of science called cognitive science. It's really, really fascinating. If I was going to go back to college, I'd definitely be a cognitive scientist. I think it's really fascinating to think about how do we use tools from psychology and neuroscience to study AI and vice versa, which I think is a pretty cool topic. Okay, so those were the phrases. I want you to turn to a neighbor and see if you can use all four of these in a sentence. So context, distribution, sampling, and training corpus. Take a minute and see if you can talk to a neighbor and say out loud what you think how you would use these. What we're doing right now in teacher speak is called formative assessment, asking you to try and see how it's formulated in your brain. Have you gotten it or not? Okay, does anyone want to give it a shot or raise a question? We have a brave soul who's building the courage, the activation energy. Do you want to hear mine? Not too bad. Okay, so well, I'll give it to you at the end. So, one question that you might want to know about is why now? Of all the times, why not 10 years ago? Why not 10 years in the future? Why is AI happening right now? And it all comes down to a scientific breakthrough, which is this paper, which came out of the Google DeepMind group. It's called Attention is All You Need. And the basic argument was y'all are trying to do way too much to generate a human brain. You just need this idea of attention and whatever that is, I'll explain in a second. And with that, you can produce really quite capable text. So this a paper. You see the date here, 2017. How long does it take scientific innovation to become actual product? Apparently 5 years, because ChatGPT was launched to the public in 2022. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this attention piece because I think it's interesting. I think it's the sort of like killer idea that has created this why now moment. So it all comes down to something like this. I have three sentences on the board for you here. A crane lifted the steel beam to the top of the building. Can you picture the crane? Great. Standing motionless at the end of a pond was a beautiful crane. Can you picture the crane? She had to crane her neck to see over the crowd. Can you picture that crane? Okay. Those are all the same word. Did you picture the same crane? No. In fact, one of those things isn't even an object, it's a verb. And so you had to, when I say picture a crane, you're imagining a scene where someone's craning their neck around, right? Which actually has a beautiful symmetry with the top, no, middle example. And so how is your brain easily, trivially able to figure out what's going on with these different disambiguations of the word crane. You're using the context, right? You are looking at these words, and these are ones that I picked out because it was what my brain thought were the most impactful words, but you might have a different list. That's totally fine. And they are basically updating. I mean that in like a computer science sense. They're updating the understanding inside your synapses, inside your brain, of what the word crane actually means in that context. So if we were to follow through the neurological pathways as you very slowly read that sentence, if I gave it to you one slow word at a time, crane lifted. And I bet if I had a crane, originally you'd be like, I'm going to wait and see. My brain isn't going to tell me which version of crane that is. Or maybe you make a choice in your head, right? Then it said lifted. And even the word lifted is probably starting to shift you to the construction vehicle, right? Although birds can lift things, that's possible, yeah. And then the steel beam, now you're solidified, right? No pun intended, to this idea of like which crane I'm talking about. Now, it is absolutely possible that I could be telling a different story, right? These are Google Gemini, by the way. If you want image generation, Google's Nano Banana, which is one of the worst named product ever, is actually quite good at making images. So here's a beautiful crane. Apparently that means it has a boa on it, and a tiara and weird eyes, which is really funny because this image came first and then I had it make this one. And if we zoom in on this picture, I can't zoom in, but you can see this crane also has a boa, which turns into a hand. That's like cool AI weirdness artifact. Anyways, this is these are things that we could imagine, but you would need a lot more context to envision either one of these two stories, right? I would have to talk about the massive feathers, or I'd have to talk about the oil dripping into the pond or something to help you see, oh, he means that crane. Oh, I see. Okay, interesting. Right. So that's a thing that's going on in your brain. We would call it attention. You're paying attention to this word. This word impacts your understanding of that word. In the computer science language, we talk about word embeddings, but that's not something your brain does. It's a little bit different. So here's a longer one, and I'm going to read it out loud to you. So a retired sailor sat on the dock in the warmth of the early morning sun, mending nets with hands that moved from decades of muscle memory. Gulls wheeled overhead, diving toward the fishing boats that rocked gently in the harbor. The smell of salt and diesel drifted across the water, mixing with the earthly scent of rope and wet wood. Her youngest granddaughter waved from the shore, and the old woman tied off the last line and waved back. Something probably just happened in your brain, and it has to do with that word. You probably saw this word and said, what? Um, who's her? And then one of a few things happened. You maybe said on the dock and from the shore, and you said, wait a minute, her isn't on the shore, so maybe she's what would be near the dock. Wait, the dock. Oh, is she the sailor? Right? That might have been what your brain said. Or it might have been something like retired and the old woman. Or it might have been something like she's mending nets and she tied off the last line, right? All this together, this, by the way, is called, I guess it's called the garden path phenomenon, which is a term from, I think, psychology, where you are walking down the garden, where you walk your reader down the garden path, and then you make them realize, oh, wait a minute, this is not a garden. This is someone's lawn, and now I have to get off this lawn or something along those lines. Um, and the reason I bring up this longer example is for two reasons. The first is this, what your brain just did, what you felt, you probably viscerally felt like, whoop, hold on, that is attention. And that is what we figured out how to do in this 2017 paper is how to model this. That's not quite true. Attention existed before that. Their paper was more like, this is all you need. Don't keep sidelining attention, make it the primary focus. But this idea of this computer science thing which models that moment in your brain where that happened, where you say, whoops, I got to update my understanding of what that word was or what that concept was. That being modeled by a computer program is why we are where we are today. I think that's kind of interesting. It doesn't necessarily feel like the most important thing. It's kind of cool that programmers were able to program something that feels like it models. That's a pretty human thing to be like, whoops, hold on, I misunderstood that. In this case, it's really fascinating to overlap that conversation around conversations of bias and gender. Because I think that probably if you are feeling a very visceral, like, whoops, that's the wrong person, oops, again, like I did. By the way, AI made this paragraph because I asked for a good, juicy paragraph about this. And I wanted to be surprised by it too. So I didn't know it was coming up. And then I got this one, this her, and I was like, whoa. And then it said, like, how'd that her feel for you? And I was like, don't ask me that question. That's weird. I'm the AI researcher here. Anyways, so this is attention. This is the mechanism at play. And that brings us to this tool. I'm going to try and show us this real quick. So this is a transformer explainer. And so this is a little bit small and hard to read here. Can I zoom in? I can, and scroll up over here. So what we've got here is a text box. And so this says, Dear audience members, an LLM is a tool that allows the. That's what I've got so far. What would we call that, class? We would call that my context. Excellent. So there's the context. And what we see as we look through here, this is like kind of way TMI. This is the internal workings of what's going on here. You notice the word attention's right there, right? And showing up here and goes all the way through to the end. And here's the probability distribution, right? And also notice it happened to sample something that I think is really interesting. It sampled the word listener. And you might say, whatever, it's listener, who cares? Let's go back and reread the context again, because it's really important. The context was, oh my, that's not what I wanted to do. The context was, Dear audience members, an LLM is a tool that allows the. And the next word, apparently, that it wanted to choose was listener. Why did it choose listener? Well, the first most important answer is we don't know, right? It used its knowledge that comes from its training corpus to model human language to predict what it thinks is the next best word. I have a feeling that it overvalued the word audience in its attention mechanism. It's screwed up. Does that make sense? So why overvalued? The reason is I, as a human, as a person who understands AI, I know that the people who utilize LLMs, we don't call them listeners. We call them users, right? And notice that, by the way, happens to be the top choice. And also LL, what the heck is that? This option right here makes no sense to me. And it says student here, which I think is really fascinating. I don't know why that is. But it happened to choose, it was, it doesn't always pick the top choice. It happened to choose listener. So this is a moment where an LLM relatively confidently makes a statement which is factually incorrect. Now, this isn't a huge problem. Saying listener instead of user is just a little weird. It's not like a deep lie, right? But it's a moment where an AI has made a little oopsie. It's an inaccuracy, right? So we call this term, here's another term for you if you don't have this in your jargon yet. We call this what we call a hallucination. So going back to this other example, foraging in its native, what if I had already previously established that this was a sea creature? And then the LLM happened to sample and say, foraging in its native forest. Now, I guess those could be kelp forests, maybe. That's a stretch. But that's a moment where we say, wait a minute, we know what this it is, and forest doesn't make sense, right? So we're using our human brains to analyze this text and to say, wait a minute, this isn't reality. This is something wrong. Just because it's statistically possible for this to happen. And it had a bad dice roll, had a bad coin flip, and it chose what we humans would call the wrong word. But it doesn't know whether it's right or wrong. It just knows this is a word with, in this case, a 4% chance, in this case, a 17% chance, and it chooses it. Question.
So hallucinations have become less
common over the last year or two.
I can also repeat it.
Yeah. So hallucinations have become less common over the last year or two, I think. And is that because of more sophisticated programs that understand context, or is it because the training sets have gotten better, or both?
Yeah, so the question is, we could imagine if we go back to this picture, we can see a bit of the model here, right? There's like the underworkings, it's almost like wires that are getting plugged together. These are all digital, by the way, they're not literal wires. Are we changing what we're seeing here in terms of basically the digital equivalent of wires being connected to better model language? Or is it the case that the data that goes into the system is stronger? So the answer is certainly has to be both, but I think it's an interesting question to wonder about the amount, like which one matters more. A lot of researchers believe that we are in right now this almost like lazy, intellectually lazy period of AI development, where if you just make it bigger and you throw more text at it, it just keeps working better. We don't have to have another interesting scientific breakthrough like the attention mechanism showing up, where we can say, oh, cool, this is a new tool, let's try it. We just keep making things bigger with bigger computers, and it just keeps working better. So I'm not an insider into the trade. I don't know for a fact, but it's shocking how much more data means more power with these tools, at least as it stands right now. So I don't want to rule that out, but I definitely think that what we're seeing is a much more sophisticated understanding of actual language, such that this idea of hallucinations is not a thing of the past, but it's much less common now. One of the most famous, there's several famous examples of these hallucinations causing trouble in the world. One of the most famous examples is in law. There's a lawyer who presented a case study. This has actually happened many times. Who presented case studies in court. And then it later turned out that those were not real case studies at all. They were completely fabricated by AI. Famously, teachers will take a look at a student's paper and pull up randomly, they'll choose three of the sources in the bibliography. And if those check out, as in like those are actual valid sources, then it's probably the case that the paper was written by the human and not by the AI. This is their sort of internal AI barometer. Turns out that is a 2022 idea. It doesn't make sense in this world that we live in 2026, because AI has absolutely no trouble researching and pulling actual resources now and then correctly generating bibliographies in MLA citation or whatever format we want to do. So one of the things that we're discovering here is that there's this rapid pace of improvement of these systems. And if you aren't someone who stays in tune and keeps checking and learning about this, it's very possible that you're going to get swept up and sort of lost in the capabilities of these tools. They've really improved, and they continue to improve massively over time. So yeah, I would say this idea of hallucination is an important one to keep in mind, but it's much less common now. It's a great question. Any other questions? Okay. One thing I like to say to students is, and this is just a bit of an aside and a bit of a teaser for next time, is I like to tell students that AI hallucinates just like your Uncle Norm hallucinates. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that, oh, by the way, here's a cute picture that AI added this robot to the Norman Rockwell painting for me. It says, is this the appropriate time to initiate giving thanks protocols? I didn't ask it to add any speech bubble. I just said put a robot raising a hand and it asked the question. So what I mean by this is I think it's really important that we maintain a critical lens on all text that we receive, whether that's from a human, like our lying Uncle Norm, or if it's from an AI. And there's something interesting going on in the brain when we see typewritten text. We just believe it more likely in ways that are unfortunate. It's just a sort of like a neurological thing that we need to recognize, and it's a bias that we need to identify and keep in mind, is that when we read text that's typeset, we tend to believe it with a little bit more confidence than we ought to. Whereas we tend to just be like, never mind, Uncle Norm, I'm not going to listen to you. Like we throw out those ideas a little earlier. Maybe we should trust humans a little bit more. We should trust AI a little bit less than our natural default. But anyways, I think this is an important idea to keep in mind is that we have to be critical consumers of everything that we read. Okay, so the key ideas that we've talked about so far is that generative AI is like the car. It's the ChatGPT, it's the Claude, it's the Gemini, it's those sorts of things. Within that, we have this thing called a large language model, which is the thing I tried to make you define with the idea of context and distribution and sampling and that sort of thing. It's our engine, and that is powered by this attention mechanism. This is the cool new idea. This is the idea of, oh, wait a minute, if I resist a little micro explosion, then I get a bit of force from that, and I can use that to power something. That's the internal combustion engine, right? So this piston or this idea of combustion is our attention mechanism. This is the new interesting thing that happened in the somewhat recent past. That's the why now piece, okay? So this is what I think people should probably take away. I've got a bunch more things to talk about that I could keep going with, but I want to just see if we have questions. This is probably the first potential stopping off point. If we want to get into discussion, we can keep going with more things if people want to. I've got options. What questions do people have? Yeah,
Can you explain again what attention means?
absolutely. Remember back to that paragraph when you saw the word? Oh, sorry, thank you. I got to repeat the question. The question was, can I remind you all of what attention means? So attention, in this case, when I use the word on this slide, I'm talking about a computer science concept. Okay, it's a concept that showed up. It was developed before 2017, but it was really kind of capitalized in this 2017 paper. The attention mechanism in AI is when you do something in a computer program that models the idea inside your brain that happened when you saw that word she and you were like, whoa, what? Oh, that person is she. That sailor was actually female. I had no idea. My brain automatically thought that sailor was male, right? Inside your brain, when you updated that moment, right after you saw the word she and you went back and you changed your basically your understanding of what this sailor is, that mental moment is a an analogy for what the attention mechanism is in computer science. So attention is the technical tool that models that same mental cognitive process of updating your understanding of what a word actually is. Why should we care? Because it answers the why now question. Like, why is this happening now as opposed to in the past or in the future? Okay. The other thing to keep in mind here is that these tools are essentially really, really fancy autocomplete, right? Given some text, generate the next text. And so it's in that regard actually quite fascinating to ask questions around, then why are they so good? Like if you've used AI recently to ask it questions, you'd realize that it's actually really quite incredible at what it's doing for the most part. There's some disciplines that it really struggles with, but in computer science in particular, that's actually really amazing, which causes all kinds of questions in a computer science classroom, which we're going to talk about next week. Other questions? These are wonderful questions so far. Yes.
So the training corpus
Mhm.
are all the possible words.
Ah, good. Okay, so the question was the training corpus are all the possible words. So if we go back to the slide and we see this here, the training corpus is not all these words. This would be called the lexicon. I didn't give you that term. This is all the possible words that I can choose from. If I were to ask you roughly how many words are in the English language, would you guess the answer is like 200 or more? More. Is it 2,000 or more? Is it 20,000 or more? Is it 200,000 or more? Right. So there are definitely more than 200,000 words in the English language, but once you get down that far, the probability of them showing up is very, very close to zero. So the collection of words in the lexicon of an LLM, the kinds of words it might choose from, is something in the realm of tens of thousands, like 80,000 or 60,000 or something like that. That's not the training corpus. That's the possible words I could choose from. The training corpus, this is a good point that I didn't actually touch on enough, so I should come back to this. This is essentially the whole of the internet. So let's grab all the text we can possibly handle, build more and more and more and more and more text data, and then feed that into the model to help train it to learn how to produce these numbers. How do you get that 22? How do you get that 9? How do you get that 5? How do you determine these percentages? You do so by reading lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of text, way more than a human could read in their lifetime. And then you use that to set basically a whole bunch of numbers. So there are, when you think about these models, think about the inner workings of these models, you ask the question about how many parameters they have. And that parameters is basically the number of little levers. You ever seen one of those big sound machines at like a concert and you can like dial this one, you can dial that one. That's the image, that's the metaphor you want to keep in your mind of what these things are at the very bottom, at the 1 and 0 level. They're just a ton of little numbers. And the training corpus is the sound guy listening to all the music and being like, "Oh, I gotta dial this down a little bit. I'm gonna move this up a little bit. Okay. Oh, gotta move this dial down a little bit." That's the training process. They're listening to all that music, right? So for us, the training corpus is all of the massive, massive, massive volumes of text, which, by the way, that collection is highly, highly proprietary. This is what one of the things that is probably even more safely guarded by these AI companies than their model architectures, how many dials to use. It's a very, very closely guarded secret. So when I got the question about like, how is their training data changed? We definitely don't know, and there's zero chance we could find out because that is like their special sauce. That's the competitive factor they have against their competitors is what is our training corpus and how do we do that training process? Yeah.
So with that, is there a big difference between the different AI companies and what they're good at or what they're not good at?
So the question was, is there a big difference between the AI companies? So just go back to the AI companies. I have a slide right over here. So we've got Anthropic's Claude, Microsoft Copilot, Google Gemini, OpenAI's ChatGPT. Those are the big four, I would say. There's a few others too. Is there a difference between these different LLMs? Well, I certainly think there's some difference. There's more a difference within the models. So if you used an older model versus a newer model at a given company, the difference there is stark, as opposed to the difference between Claude versus ChatGPT. There is, however, a pretty significant difference in the company ethics of these various companies. And so I bet if you went and checked in my purchase history about when I switched from OpenAI to Anthropic, I bet you could probably follow the news and make a guess as to when that purchase changed. Okay, cool. Other questions before I kind of carry on for the last little bit to wrap us up? Yeah.
So that changed too, and
Mhm.
then I saw in the news about how Anthropic was like buying books and ripping them up and feeding them into their model. And so like, then I kind of felt like they're all kind of ripping off other people's intellectual property and their
Copyright. So.
Yeah, right. So, but it's more than that.
These questions are really interesting and really important. And that brings us to this really controversial slide that I skipped over before. Let's go there. I I think I think that AI is causing a lot, or is the face of a lot of problems right now in a lot of sectors. The energy infrastructure and the environmental impact is a big question that I know came up because the presenters all got an email saying, "Hey, make sure you talk about this," right? The economy and automation and job loss is a big question mark right now. I'm an educator. I think a lot about the impact of generative AI on education. Uh, I have a somewhat controversial opinion here, and I don't think that this is something that is going to be true across the whole of the speaker series. So I encourage you to, just another plug, to come back and hear what everyone else has to say. I would argue that AI is the leaky roof that shows its cracks, and the storm in this metaphor is all of these failing systems. So the education infrastructure of our society has been crumbling for a very long time. So much so that I think it was the 1980 or 1981, there was a famous book that was published. I don't remember the title of it, but the main argument of the book is that the the overemphasis, the over concern on grades has cheapened the world of education to be completely transactional. And this is in the 80s. This is very long time ago at this point. And so if you have an infrastructure, if you have a system, a major system of the world in which it's got these cracks, then AI comes along and gives you an easy tool to expose the difference between do I care about learning or do I care about a good grade? And then we're seeing challenges afoot from there. I think this is definitely an opinion. I definitely think that people could argue against this. But I think that saying that we need to shut down AI because of its impact on, say, the environment is really more a question of we heard the call as a society to generate clean energy at a much more robust rate than we were, and we did not answer that call. And then AI shows up and it's an energy hog, and we don't have the infrastructure to support it. So that's my take. I don't think AI companies are immune to blame for sure. I think there's plenty of things that those companies ought to be doing better, but I don't think it's exclusively their fault that we're, say, for example, in this energy problem that we're in right now. So that's my somewhat controversial take on that. Other questions? I want to make sure, I don't want to get us in trouble for not leaving the library in time, but yes.
I've played around with ChatGPT and sort of want to check out Claude now. I wonder if, have you ever presented a project simultaneously to say two of those programs and said, do this for me, tell me about this, and seen what they come up with?
Good question. So the question was, I'm thinking of switching. Should I, or have I, was Nick, ever tested simultaneously projects in each of these two? It's a good question, and I would say for the most part, the answer is no, I have before, but it's almost never an apples to apples conversation, unless you're using say the free tier or an equivalent level on each of these. I think it's important to note that the quality level between the free and the paid version of any of these projects or any of these tools vastly outmatches the difference in quality between the products. So if you think about OpenAI's stack of tools, you want to just use the best flagship model you can. Or if you are looking about Claude's or Anthropic's suite of tools, you want to just use the highest level of Claude you can. If you try to compare an unpaid version, a free version to a paid version, the difference is just going to be astronomical. And so have I tested them? A little bit, but when I'm doing so, I'm testing the two free versions. And so it's like pitting two crabs against each other and seeing what they can handle compared to something like the kind of the more flagship paid versions, which are considerably more capable. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you think they're going to start charging and not have the free version?
Do I think they're going to start charging and not have the free versions? I think that not only do I not understand the business model of AI, I don't even think that AI companies understand their own business model and how to monetize this tool. I don't, I believe at this point they are, like they've exceeded their venture amounts that the capital they've raised, like they're positive at this point. But given the incredible amount of infrastructure investment, I think that there's a lot of people that are waiting for their windfall to come from this idea that they've put some money into. I don't know how they're going to continue to monetize. I imagine that we're going to continue to see. I mean, I liken the free tier of things to being like the gateway drug experience of like, let me give you a taste of what this is like, and then we'll rope you in for your subscription. I imagine that's what their thinking is, but I'm not sure. Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very interested in your concept of voice and supporting your voice versus suppressing your voice. And, one of the potential, values in the AI systems as they are now is that they can really become quite personalized and understand your voice and the way that your mind works. I don't know if you have the paid version of one of these things, you become the context, part of the context, and it knows what you're talking about frequently because of all of the interactions that you've had with it in the past. And I find that really fascinating because it is a way of moving more towards a supporting role rather than a suppressing role. And I'm wondering, you're going to get into this next week, I'm sure.
Mhm.
I wonder if you reflect a little bit on that. I've also thought about it in how much more they are able to personalize now than they were even a year ago.
Mhm.
The development in that domain has been dramatic, I think, in the last year or two.
Yeah. So the question I would distill down to like almost like how do you actualize this idea of supporting your voice as opposed to supplanting your voice is one piece of what I'm hearing. The other thing that I think that I'm hearing is something to the effect of the rapid increase in the personalization that shows up in these products. It's interesting because what I don't want us to get confused in is an AI might like to learn, or it might be able to learn how I write. It might understand my writing style, and it might produce text that's more echoes my writing style. I would argue that it's still replacing my voice, right? Because I didn't do the thinking to produce that text. And so when I think of the voice, my voice, I think of it as actually being my own. And even if AI learns to write and I sort of write on the side and then we compare and contrast, and even if it's a word for word copy, which is probably never going to happen again, stochastic parrot, right? Um, Even if that happens, I still think there's something to be said about me producing it because I am worthy of producing words in the world. Darn it. And so that's the thing that I think is just like a really important take. I just want to share. I had prepared this slide because I figured this would come up. When I think of what does it mean to have AI support your voice as opposed to supplant your voice, I think of trying to be very specific about the verb of what the text is doing in that context, right? If you think about an AI sort of as being kind of like a little bit like a human assistant in a way, right? Like I've got this text, I want it to produce that text. It's almost like you're having a conversation with a human. Don't get confused, you're very much not. But when you think about how you ought to use AI, if you use those sorts of words, AI is doing this work for me, it's doing this verb for me. It can be helpful to actualize, am I supporting or supplanting my voice in this moment? So here's a bunch. This list, by the way, was generated by AI. No surprise there. Why? Because I would argue that one of the most important forms of supporting my voice would be in brainstorming. I happen to be a pretty poor brainstormer. I'm a good ideas guy. I come up with a really, like, that's the idea. Like supporting versus supplanting, those are my words. Thank you very much. I'm very proud of those. But when it comes to like, okay, just I need some examples so that I can start slotting these in here so people can understand what I'm talking about here. That technically is work that I could have chosen to do. I don't consider that personally to be an important aspect of my voice, right? This collection of words that we see here, the collection on its own, I don't consider that necessarily to be a part of my voice. However, where I place them, the judgment call that I make, I very much do. So this is where I would take some of those 25 words that were down there and place them. So for example, I think drafting is something, for example, drafting emails, drafting lesson plans, drafting whatever. I typically don't use AI text to draft things for myself. I might have it draft things and then I might read it and then I might write something different. Yeah, that's not drafting. I didn't use that text. I learned from that text. I would describe that more as prototyping, which I actually think I put right here, kind of much closer to the left-hand side. So do you need to do this? Do you need to take all these words and slot them in here? I don't think so. It might be a helpful exercise for you, but I do think when you are working with AI, if you work with AI, you should be able to name the verb that the AI is doing for you. If you can do that, if you can name the verb that the AI is doing, then I think you have a good chance of retaining your humanity, retaining your voice. Question in the chat, it looks like.
Yes, there is. Actually, there are two.
Excellent.
Here's the first one. Where do AI coding tools fall on the spectrum of supporting versus supplanting?
It's a good question. I think an argument can certainly be made that they are drafting. And I think that it's important for me to acknowledge when I place these, whatever this is, 13, 15, no, it's 11 words on the page. This is a subjective choice. This is me making those choices. I happen to be someone who probably could have gotten a job working as a coder in the industry and chose not to. I chose to become a teacher. And I think if we got into the why of that, we would understand why I put the drafting where I did here. And I would argue that writing code is probably a form of drafting in a way. And yet I put it all the way over here. Now, if I have AI write some code in order for me to then critique the code live in front of students, that's different. That's not drafting because it's not simulating, it's not pretending to be my voice. And the other question?
Yes, one other question at the moment. Do any of these systems have a well-developed model of how they do what they do so they can answer questions about that?
So this sounds to me a bit like the question of AI interpretability or AI explainability. So this is the argument that these tools are what we would call black boxes. Words come in, words go out. We don't know how they chose the next words, but they do that in roughly this way. And by that, we know the tool, we know attention, we know the parameters, blah, blah, blah. We just don't know the values of what those parameters are set to, and we don't know what that means, right? If that parameter is set to 4.397, what does that mean about how we ought to choose the next word in a sentence? It's not exactly clear. In fact, it's very unclear. So this is the idea of interpretability. I happen to have an old student who works at Anthropic, and he works in the model interpretability team at Anthropic. So I know that they actively care about this. This is something that they certainly devote human life energy to. So it's definitely something that's important to them. I would say in certain industries, it matters a lot more. So for example, if you are denying loans to people, well, there's laws behind how you make those determinations. You cannot deny someone a loan, for example, based on the color of their skin, right? And you have to be able to prove that you did not do so if you were to deny them a loan. So that's a world of AI. There is a lot of AI in banking software, but it's very different tools because typically they need to have a much higher level of explainability than something like an LLM would produce. So this gets into a question of are these companies doing it? It's an internal question. I don't have much access. I know this one old student who's amazing, but he didn't tell me anything. So I don't know much about it, but I definitely know that it's an important question to ask about. It's also a very, very hard question because there are trillions, or I don't know, maybe even quadrillions at this point, of parameters in these models, and being able to explain all of those is beyond intractable. So I don't know. It's an interesting open research problem to worry about model interpretability. Okay, I need to get us out of here, and I want to show you one more slide. Okay, so it's all the way at the end. Oh, agentic AI. Forgot about that. You've heard of this AI agent thing? AI agents and agentic AI and all this. This is the new term that we're hearing. This is like the 2026 version of the hype for 2024 about generative AI in general. What does it mean? Well, it means that it has agency, which is actually not as exciting as it sounds. It means it has access to things like the files on your computer, your Gmail folder, stuff like that. Do I think we should be doing that? No. Why not? Because it means that we're grabbing something from this side and something from over here and something from over here and smashing them all together into a single AI. I'm much more a fan of bespoke, small, one-off use cases that I can approve of. So I haven't gotten into agentic stuff. I think it's cart before the horse, and I'll just move on from there. These are prompts. I can share these with people if people want to know more about prompts. This is how you actually make this happen. You don't have to read this. Don't read this. I see people don't try and read it. This is text for an AI, not for you. And so questions about generative AI lying, I'm gonna skip past that. I'm gonna show you these two slides real quick because I think this is a really important idea. So this is an education hero of mine, Ron Berger. He is actually a kindergarten teacher. He is truly a fantastic man. He's written this book, An Ethic of Excellence. And he has this quote: "If you're going to do something, I believe you should do it well. You should sweat over it. You should make sure it is strong and accurate and beautiful, and you should be proud of it." Doesn't he sound like a kindergarten teacher? His language is beautiful. I just love it. That's something I truly believe in, is that like when I think about like using AI, I need to make sure that I'm still honoring that. Yeah. And I strongly believe that I can use AI in particular ways by not supplanting my voice, but supporting my voice in order to still do awesome things. And I actually used AI to make a lot of this talk, but the ideas are mine, for example. And the last one is this. I always end talks with this because I think it's one of the most important sentences I've ever read in my life. Um, how we spend our days is, of course, how we spend our lives. The moments that we use, the moments, every single little decision that we make of how to engage with the world is the sum total of our life. And so do you choose to use AI? I'm not telling you you have to use AI. I guess if anything, I'm telling you that if you're going to use AI, make sure that it is honoring this idea and make sure it's honoring this idea. Let's do it. So I'll stop there, and so that way we don't get kicked off at the library staff. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Nick, for coming, and, this has just been, I feel like I'm thinking about a lot of. You've given us a lot to think about, and I really look forward to next week and how it's being used or not used in education. I think it really is an exciting topic, and I think I've played with it a little bit, and it's like, oh, I didn't know it could do that. And I think we're all finding that it can be a very useful tool. But this summer when we had the service, there were so many people going, it's too dangerous. And so I think you've helped us understand it, and I look forward to the rest of the series. But thank you for coming so much. And remember, next week it is on Thursday, not on Wednesday. So okay, we look forward to seeing you. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night. Right.
Thank you. That was great. Yeah, I love your idea about being able to say the verb. I think that's really important. Actually, I had never thought about it in those terms before, but being able to say exactly